I want to talk about modes. Now, what modes are is when you play basically a scale that begins and ends on one key degree or another. So in the little riff I just played, I was going through all the chords of the key of C and playing riffs that were built around the mode that is most closely associated with that chord in each case. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you know, that's predictable, that's rudimentary. You don't want to do that. But frankly, predictable and rudimentary is the way to get started doing anything. So if you want to get an understanding of modes, how they work, what you can ultimately do with them, and you know, just treat them as a way into understanding the overall structure of whatever key you're playing in, so that you can begin and end on any note of the key, and that you can find your way around in the key and on the fingerboard. Now I'll play all 7 chords of the key and the mode that's associated with each chord, most closely associated with each chord. So the first chord in the key of C, C major 7th, and that is Ionian mode. The second chord, D minor 7th, Dorian mode. The third chord, E minor 7th, Phrygian mode. The fourth chord, F major 7, that's Lydian mode. The fifth chord, G dominant 7, Mixolydian mode. Chord number 6, Aeolian mode, A minor 7th. Chord number 7, B half diminished, or B minor 7 flat 5, and the mode is B Locrian mode. And that takes us back to Ionian mode, the C major scale. This is a very rudimentary idea, music theory-wise, and it can be problematic on the guitar because since there are multiple ways to play every scale and multiple places to find every chord voicing and every specific note in every single key on the guitar, it can be daunting to really get a handle on how these modes work. Now, if you're playing the piano, all you'd have to do is begin and end on a different note. There's one place for each of those modes and one way fundamentally to play each of those modes. On the guitar, not so true. There's more than one way to do all of those things. So you got to start somewhere. It really helps to understand the structure of each mode and not just memorize rote fingerings. You know, you can rely on muscle memory just so far before you're going to realize the limitations of doing it that way. So modes, since they are scales, are based not simply on notes, but on intervals. The distances between the notes is what defines scales. The major scale is 2 whole steps and a half step, followed by 3 whole steps and a half step. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C amounts to whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now, we can take a major scale and actually break it into 2 pieces. We can take the first 4 notes of the scale and look at the interval structure of those 4 notes, and then take the next 4 notes of the scale and look at the interval structure of those 4 notes. And what you realize is that the interval structure of the first 4 notes of the major scale and the interval structure of the last 4 notes of the major scale actually follow the same pattern, and that there is a whole step between those 2 4-note sequences. The name that we give those 4-note sequences is the tetrachord. Tetrachord is a group of 4 notes that makes up half of a scale. The distance between note number 1 and note number 4 is a tetrachord. The distance between note number 5 and back to note number 1, an octave higher than the first note number 1, that's also a tetrachord. We can approach every mode the same way. So when we look at the Ionian mode, we see whole step, half step twice with a whole step in between. If we look at the next mode in the key, Dorian mode, what we find is it is whole step, half step, whole step, twice, also with a whole step in between those two tetrachords. And if we look at the third mode, Phrygian mode, you see that it is half step, whole step, twice, with a whole step in between the two tetrachords. That's 3 of the 7 modes, each of which has duplicate tetrachords within it. The other 4 modes are a little bit different. In the other 4 modes, the 4-note sequences are not duplicated. And so they get a little bit less symmetrical, a little bit more complicated to remember. But we're going to dig into those as well. I want to just start with those first 3 modes. It's a very interesting way that you can play them. Let's say we start on the first fingered note on the fingerboard, the lowest fingered note on the fingerboard. That's F. And if we play these modes 4 notes per string using your 4 fingers, 1 finger per note, don't skip any fingers. We're going to go from F up a whole step to G, up a whole step to A, and then a half step to B flat. Now the key of F has only 1 flat. All the rest of the notes are natural tones, so it's not extremely complicated. If you already know how to play in the key of F, you'll get it. But even if you don't, all we have to do is start with first finger, second finger, third finger, fourth finger, and put a whole step in between the first and second, a whole step in between the second and third, and a half step between the third and fourth finger. F, G, A, B flat. Now we're going to go to the next string. We're going to go to C. That's the 3rd fret on the next string. It's very interesting if you line your fingers up with the frets from where your 4th finger ended up on that B flat. That's the 6th fret on the 6th string. Your fingers will fit 1 in each fret space, and your first finger on the 5th string, that's the next note. That's a whole step between your 4th finger and your first finger. So you can start from C, D, E, F, and the pattern will be identical. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. So you're duplicating that tetrachord. That's the first mode. The next mode, Dorian mode, will begin on G on the 4th string, 5th fret, first finger, and this time the half steps will fall between the 2 central fingers, the 2 middle fingers of your hand. The first finger to the second finger is a whole step, that's G, A. Second finger, third finger, half step, A, B flat. Third finger, fourth finger, whole step, B flat, C. G, A, B flat, C. And on the next string, we're going to do the same trick again. Line the fingers up with the frets. So where your 4th finger is on the 10th fret, you're going to now line your fingers up, and your first finger will end up on the 7th fret on the next string. That note is D. So we're going to go D, E, F, G. Whole step, first to second finger, half step, second to third, whole step, third to fourth finger. So we have Dorian mode simply by putting the half step in the middle of each 4-note sequence. The next mode begins on A on the 2nd string. Now, we went from G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G. 4th finger was on the 12th fret at the end of the Dorian mode, 12th fret, 3rd string. And when we go to the next mode, because we're crossing between the 3rd string and the 2nd string, the tuning is different between those 2 strings than between any of the other 2 adjacent strings. And so we end up on the 10th fret. So we end up only putting 3 spaces between the fingers. We're going from the 12th fret to the 10th fret, 12, 11, 10. On the 10th fret now, we're playing an A, and this time Phrygian mode begins with a half step. So we're going to go first finger, second finger, half step, second finger, third finger, whole step, and then a whole step to the 4th finger. A, B flat, C, D. Then we go back to our original plan of lining the fingers up with the frets. So you can see we're going to put the 4th fingers now on the 15th fret. And we're going to end up on the 12th fret with the first finger. So we're going to go E, F, G, A. So that's Phrygian mode, begins with a half step, whole step, we go to the next string starting on E, and then again, half step, whole step, whole step. So by doing that, we can play the first three modes of the key of F, 4 notes per string, all in a row like so. And then back the other way. Those patterns will apply in every key, and if you want to just get a picture in your mind of how modes work, my humble opinion, this is the best way to get started. The 3 modes that we just did, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, can be understood as pairings of identical tetrachords within each mode. The rest of the modes do not follow that exact logic. So what about those? Well, let's say we start with that F Ionian. When we get to the second tetrachord in that mode, we are on the 5th step of the key. C is the 5th step of the key of F. And if we play the exact same pattern we were just playing, where we start with 2 whole steps and a half step, and then we go to what would be the first tetrachord of the Dorian mode, well, that's Mixolydian mode. It takes the second tetrachord of the Ionian mode and the first tetrachord of the Dorian mode, and that's Mixolydian mode. 2 different tetrachords within the mode with a whole step in between them, just like we had a whole step in between the 2 tetrachords in every other mode, but this time the 2 tetrachords are not the same as each other. The next mode we'll look at is the 6th mode, Aeolian mode, which begins on the second tetrachord of the Dorian mode. So if we started on Dorian, G Dorian in the key of F, G, A, B flat, C, and we go to D, D is the 6th mode of the key of F, and we start like we would be on the second tetrachord of the Dorian mode, D, E, F, G, and then we take the first tetrachord of the Phrygian mode, A, B flat, C, D. That's Aeolian mode. So now we have 5 of the 7 modes: Ionian mode, Dorian mode, Phrygian mode, and then we jump to Mixolydian mode and Aeolian mode. What we're looking for here ultimately is symmetry. And in this modal symmetry, you may notice that these modes have mirror counterparts. The Ionian mode and the Phrygian mode are actually mirror images of each other. Palindromic modes, sometimes they're called. The interval structure of the Ionian mode is exactly the reverse of the interval structure of the Phrygian mode. The interval structure of the Mixolydian mode is exactly the reverse of the interval structure of the Aeolian mode. The Dorian mode, the second mode, has its own mirror image. It is absolutely symmetrical every which way. Now, it has no mirror image counterpart. Well, simply because there are an odd number of modes, and you cannot pair up each mode with another counterpart when you have an odd number. So the Dorian mode is actually the odd one out, but it's the only one that is absolutely internally symmetrical. The 2 remaining modes, the Lydian mode and the Locrian mode, and I like this because they both begin with the letter L, Lydian mode, Locrian mode. And they both contain the tritone as one of their 4-note groupings, one of their tetrachords, if you will. It is not a perfect fourth, but an augmented fourth. In other words, 3 whole steps. I'll show you what I mean. So the first of those 2 modes, Lydian and Locrian, we'll look at the Lydian mode. Now in the key of F, we'll stick to the key of F for now. It is the 4th mode. F, G, A, B flat is the 4th step of the key of F. And so we're going to begin our Lydian mode on the note B flat, the first fret of the fifth string. We go B flat, C, D, E, 3 whole steps. B flat to C is a whole step, C to D is a whole step, D to E is a whole step. So 1 finger per note, 3 whole steps. The next note after E is going to be F. So there's a half step between E and F, and that takes you not 4 spaces, but 5 spaces. So you line your fingers up with the frets from E, 4th finger, 5th string, 7th fret, to first finger, 4th string, F, 3rd fret. And then we go F, G, A, B flat, whole step, half step. So Lydian mode begins with a tritone, 3 whole steps, ends basically the first 4 notes of the Ionian mode. Locrian mode is the 7th mode of the key. Since we're in the key of F, and we want the 7th step of the key of F, let's go back to E on the 4th string, 2nd fret. We will begin with the half step, whole step, whole step. That's the pattern of the Phrygian mode. So we're actually taking the 2nd tetrachord from the Phrygian mode, 7, 1, 2, 3 in the key, E, F, G, A, and then we go up a half step to B flat, C, D, E. Yes, the Locrian mode begins with a half step. The 4-note sequence is the same as the 3rd mode, Phrygian mode tetrachord, which is, of course, the counterpart of the Ionian mode. Remember that the Lydian mode ended with the tetrachord from the Ionian mode, and the Locrian mode begins with the tetrachord from the Ionian mode's counterpart, the Phrygian mode. Within each diatonic key, we can have a 4-note sequence that goes whole step, half step. We can have a 4-note sequence that goes whole step, half step, whole step. And we can have a 4-note sequence that goes half step, whole step, whole step. And finally, we can have the tritone, which is 3 whole steps. So the tritone, 3 whole steps, the half step at the beginning, followed by 2 whole steps, the half step in the middle with a whole step on either side, and a half step at the end with 2 whole steps before it. If you take the right combination of tetrachords, 4-note sequences, and including the tritone, you can then build all of the modes. Let's go over that. Ionian mode is 2 tetrachords, each of which have the half step at the end, with a whole step in between them. Dorian mode, 2 tetrachords, the same as each other, with a half step in the middle of both of them, a whole step in between the 2. Phrygian mode has the half step at the beginning of each tetrachord, duplicate tetrachords, with a whole step in between. The 4th mode, Lydian mode, begins with a tritone, 3 whole steps in a row, followed by a half step, followed by the same tetrachord that begins and ends the Ionian mode, 2 whole steps and a half step. The Mixolydian mode, the 5th mode, begins like the major scale with that same tetrachord, 2 whole steps followed by a half step. You've got a whole step in between, and the next tetrachord is whole step, whole step, the same tetrachord that you find in the Dorian mode. The next mode, Aeolian mode, begins with that same tetrachord, whole, half, whole, and ends with the tetrachord that we find in the Phrygian mode, half step, whole step, whole step. The 7th mode begins with that same tetrachord, half, whole, whole, followed by the tritone, 3 whole steps in a row. That's the architecture of the modes. The typical way that modes are generally understood is as an alteration of the major scale. In other words, if you start with a C major scale and you raise the fourth note of the C major scale. You go from F to F sharp. C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. That's Lydian mode. And in fact, yes, the Lydian mode can be thought of as a major scale with a raised fourth. Sometimes this is referred to as making the scale brighter. So if we say the C major scale is bright because it's major, then it gets brighter when you raise the fourth. But if you turn it around the other way and you flat the seventh degree of the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, then you have Mixolydian mode. Of course, that's the fifth mode of the key of F. But what we're doing is we are thinking of it not as part of the key of F necessarily, but simply as a C major scale which has had the seventh lowered. And so that is sometimes thought of as making the scale darker by lowering the seventh degree. C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. If we lower the seventh degree and the third degree of the scale, we're going to make it darker still. So we, instead of C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, we'll have C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, C. That's Dorian mode. And if we start that mode on C, then we are playing the second mode of the key of B flat. Now we can do that with all the modes, and you'll find plenty of sources for that approach to understanding modes. And the idea of taking the brightest mode, which would be Lydian mode, to the darkest mode, which would be Locrian mode, which has the most flats based on that principle of lowering notes from a natural major scale, C major scale. I'm not a big fan of that method for the simple reason that darker, lighter, altering the major scale, it doesn't give you a clear picture of how each of those modes is structured. And if we want to play these modes and use them and find different ways to apply them, we need to know the structure of the mode. So what's the best method for understanding the structure of the mode? And that is simply looking at the whole steps and the half steps within each mode and how they are organized. Brighter, darker, these are subjective terms. You may not necessarily want to think of the Lydian mode as brighter than the Ionian mode. You might have another adjective that you prefer to use. I think of it as sort of more, I don't know, mystical or strange. Brighter? Mixolydian mode, is it really darker than the Ionian mode, or is it just bluesy? Blue doesn't have to, how bright is the Ionian mode in the first place? It doesn't matter. Whatever works for you. So these are not absolutes, is the point. Brighter, darker, it's not an absolute. These are not strict musical terms. Whole steps and half steps. That's what we're talking about here. Spend a little time with that. Okay, well, that's what I got today for this video. And if you have subscribed, thank you. Don't hesitate to comment. Keep doing it, all right? What can I say?